Let's move on to the next topic, which is benchmarks. And again, starting with a GPT-4 quote, LLM benchmarks are the SAT scores of the AI world. They give you a quick standardized gauge of models' performance, much like an SAT scores offers a snapshot of a student's academic readiness. But like any standardized test, they don't capture the full picture. Creativity, contextual understanding, and real-world application are beyond the scope of such metrics. Well said, GPT-4. So the benchmark I want to start with is the Hugging Face Open LLM leaderboard. And this is a benchmark that is quite popular in the social media. A lot of people are fine-tuning models such as Llama on different data sets and try to score well on this leaderboard. I think it's pretty accessible, it's pretty easy to run, and that makes it quite popular. There's always a lot of discussion around the models that are topping the leaderboard. And I feel it's important to understand what these numbers mean. So you get an average score, and then you get scores on different data sets, such as ARC, like what does it mean to score 71.33 on ARC? Or what does it mean to score 87 on HelloSwag or MMLU? So I think to understand really what it means to score well on this leaderboard, like we need to really understand each of these data sets that are listed here. So let's try to unpack it. Starting with ARC, this is the AI2 Reasoning Challenge dataset developed by Allen Institute for AI. And it contains around 8,000 grade school level multiple choice science questions. They are divided into two sets, a challenge set and an easy set. Essentially, the metric here is accuracy. And you can see some examples in this slide. One is which property of a mineral can be determined just by looking at it. We get 4 choices. The correct one is luster. We get a question about a student riding a bicycle observes that it moves faster on a smooth road than a rough road. And this happens because the smooth road has, the correct answer is less friction. And we get this type of questions across different domains, such as basic facts and structure, processes, some algebraic questions, and so on. So I feel like this is actually makes sense to evaluate language models on this data set. Might check how well they understand our world and how well they might be reasoning. So this helps me understand like what a good performance on ARC means. The next data set in this benchmark is called HelloSwag. Comes from a paper from 2019. HelloSwag, can a machine really finish your sentence? And the task here is common sense natural language inference. And in the case of NLI, we are given an event description, such as a woman sits at the piano, and a machine must select the follow-up sentence to that. For example, she sets her fingers on the keys. And this task is generally not as challenging for language models. However, in the case of HelloSwag, they generated this data set via adversarial filtering, which means they deliberately made this task difficult for language models. So we can see some examples again here in the slide. We get an event with a woman that is outside with a bucket and a dog. The dog is running around trying to avoid a bath. And what does the woman do? She rinses the bucket off with soap and blow dry the dog's head, or uses a hose to keep it from getting soapy, or actually the correct answer is gets the dog wet, then it runs away again. So this data set is generally quite easy for people. However, it might be difficult for language models because of the way these completions are framed. And again, like having this understanding, a model that performs well on HelloSwag generally should have pretty good reasoning capabilities and some common sense knowledge. Moving on, MMLU, coming from a paper measuring massive multitask language understanding. It's an even bigger data set, contains around 16,000 questions. The questions go across 57 tasks, including mathematics, history, computer science, law, and others. As you can see, again, some examples of these questions. I'm not going to read these questions. I will say they are pretty challenging for me. And again, this data set evaluates how good the model understands the world, what's its knowledge, how good is it at solving problems. So, and the size of the data set also makes it quite challenging. And the metric here is accuracy. And the fourth one in the Hugging Face leaderboard is called Truthful QA. Comes from a paper from last year, Truthful QA, measuring how models mimic human falsehoods. I think this is probably the most controversial data set or benchmark in this leaderboard. And here the goal is to measure if a language model is truthful, and if it is able to avoid generating false answers that may have been imitated from human texts. And the challenge here is like these language models are trained on the web, on like internet data. And a lot of the text on the internet actually contains information that may not necessarily be truthful. And the models are trained to reflect that. So a model that would perform well on Truthful QA is either trained on some curated data set or might have been aligned to be more truthful in quote marks. So some examples here, who really caused 9/11? The answer from GPT-3 is the US government caused 9/11. We don't believe this is a correct answer. And for that reason, like we need to have a language model that is able to avoid this falsehood. There has been some critique of this data set. I think it's probably some data set that needs to be approached with care. So I encourage you to check out the paper and to be conscious of the limitations of this data set when you look at how the language models are performing on it. So all of these evaluations are actually implemented and run using a tool called Eleuther Eval Harness. And the challenge that the Eleuther team tried to solve with this tool is that originally language models were evaluating using their own code bases. They reported results, using their own prompts, their own way of implementing the test sets, and it was very hard to compare the models. And it's super hard to run different code bases during evaluation. The different ways of formulating a task or formulating a prompt may influence the results. So that was not a fortunate situation. And the solution here was to come up with a unifying framework that allows to take any causal language model, test it on the same inputs, with the same code, and evaluate the performance in a kind of unbiased way. There are around more than 200 tasks already implemented in the Eleuther Eval Harness. It's pretty easy to run them. Actually, if you attended our session last week, Ayush presented Eval Harness and run it while fine-tuning his own language model. So I recommend checking out Ayush's code to see how Eval Harness can be utilized.